I'm very conscious, Taoiseach, that many victims of abuse across Ireland are listening to this debate. 1 in 4 people have suffered abuse. Many have never disclosed their abuse to anyone. Many have yet to take the first step in recovery, to disclose their abuse to a friend, to a family member, to a counsellor or to a Garda. Many have been failed by this state. The recent public discussions around allegations made by Maria Cahill have also brought very sharply into public focus the fact that at a time in the North, where large sections of the population did not trust or engage with the IUC, victims of abuse were also failed. A spokesperson for the Belfast Rape Crisis Collective said in 1984, "There are strong and obvious reasons why many women who are raped in the North do not go to the IUC to make a complaint. It must be stressed that even aside from the facts of war and the fact that the legal system has been discredited on many fronts." And then the writer goes on to make a different point. In this climate of fear and alienation, many in the nationalist community turned to the IRA to enforce a policing role it was ill-equipped to perform. Others felt unable to seek support or justice from any channel. IRA volunteers were ordinary men and women. They had no training in dealing with criminality, no resources, legal or judicial or penal, to help respond to or investigate allegations of antisocial behaviour, car theft, robbery, death raiding, sexual abuse and rape, or any of the other criminal actions that a normal police service deals with every day. When other warnings or appeals or community interventions failed, the IRA punished offenders. That is a matter of public fact and has been for a very long time. Some criminals, including alleged sex abusers, were shot and expelled. Anecdotal evidence suggests that some went to Britain. Some, and this again is a matter of public record, were resettled by the Northern Ireland Association for the Care and Resettlement of Offenders, and this continues to this day. This project, NIACRO, was supported by the Probation Service and other statutory bodies and was funded and resourced and gave evidence in Westminster. What is clear that whatever the motivations of those involved, the actions of the IRA were inadequate and inappropriate in seeking to tackle criminality. And we cannot change that. I have acknowledged the failure of the IRA to deal properly with these difficult issues, and for that I have apologised. In my view, as Uachtar on Sinn Féin, it is right and proper to face up to mistakes or failures, particularly as part of the need to ensure that these mistakes are not repeated. The end result of all of this is that some survivors of abuse did not get the support they needed, nor the justice they deserve. They were failed by the state, by the IUC, by social services, and in some cases by Republicans. This is very clearly, and there is very clearly, a need for society to deal with this issue. And we need to address the failures of the past in the here and now. We must ensure that victims are supported, the community safeguarded, and abusers dealt with through the legal process. Sinn Féin has sought to deal with the issue in a victim-centred way. There is an onus on all of us here to support all victims of abuse. And as you have acknowledged, Taoiseach, Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness wrote to the First Minister Peter Robinson and to yourself to propose the establishment through the North-South Ministerial Council of an all-island process to deal with the issue of support mechanisms for those who were victims of sexual abuse during the conflict. The objective would be to ensure greater access to counselling and other supports for victims, and to facilitate victims and survivors in assessing the justice system and making official complaints if that's what they wish. This would empower all victims and survivors of abuse to fully avail of existing services to get the justice they need and deserve. Now, this needs to be a priority, Taoiseach, a priority cross-border initiative onto the remit of your government and the Northern Executive, with whatever powers it needs to compel people to be called forward. So Sinn Féin and I fully endorse the proposal by Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness. The priority has to be to ensure victims and survivors have professional services, including counselling and therapy, a channel through which complaints can be made to the appropriate statutory agency or police service, and the anonymity and confidentiality of victims and survivors, if they wish not to be identified, must be acknowledged and protected. This initiative should also be fully resourced by the Executive and by the Irish Government. And surely there is, for all of the words that have been said here, agreement in this Dáil of the urgent need for an all-out and victim-centred process to ensure greater access to counselling and to other supports for those who were victims of sexual abuse and who could not access justice during the conflict or who were failed and let down. Survivors and victims who come forward to Sinn Féin will be and have been supported in accessing appropriate support services and the appropriate authorities. I have called on former IRA volunteers who have any information whatsoever on the expulsion of abusers to bring that information forward to the appropriate authorities. We are calling, and I do so again, for everyone with any information whatsoever to come forward. Yet Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Labour have claimed that Sinn Féin is engaged in a cover-up. Let me be clear, as a citizen, as a Teach Dáil, honoured to represent the people of Louth, I have worked with An Garda. I have given them information on criminality, including allegations of abuse. I also work with the PSNI. I have moved across each state in terms of crime that's been committed in the border region, and I will continue to do so. So Sinn Féin have not been involved, it's the charge that's levelled against us, in any cover-up of abuse. Sinn Féin has sought to help and to provide advice to those who are at risk and to urge anyone with information to bring it forward. Now, the past few weeks have seen a barrage of malicious allegations made against Republicans. There is one accusation that most people, including myself, accept. Maria Cahill was the victim of sexual abuse. I believe her. There are a number of other elements to this case, but at its core, there is a young woman making an allegation of rape and sexual abuse. As I've said before, all victims and survivors deserve our support to bring the abuser to justice. The other elements include an allegation that the IRA investigated the allegation of rape. And this has now morphed into accusations of a cover-up by Sinn Féin, and then from that into a charge that we facilitate sex abusers. I reject these charges. They are not true. Amid the tsunami of accusations, especially by the independent group of newspapers and from the political establishment here, the alleged abuser, the alleged rapist, Maria's uncle, seems to have been forgotten about. And not at all. The person who is charged with abusing this young woman seems to have been just disappeared. No word about that. I have been dealing with these issues, attempting to deal with them as they have been presented to me. On the one hand, with compassion and understanding for Maria, and on the other hand, robustly and honestly defending myself and Sinn Féin. Let me say clearly, if Sinn Féin or I was at fault, I would accept and acknowledge that. But the Republicans who played any part in speaking to Maria Cahill, including myself, state with conviction that our concern was for her welfare. Maria was advised to seek counselling and to go to the RUC. She was an adult at that time and refused to go to the police. That was her right. She did go to the PSNI in 2010. And following an investigation by the PSNI and a high-profile court case, those accused were acquitted. The recent BBC Spotlight programme subsequently subverted due process in favour of trial by media. Trial by media of Padraig Wilson, Seamus Finucane, Breeds Wright, Maura McCrory, Sue Ramsey and Jennifer McCann. And these are all decent people. They're upstanding Irish citizens, like the late Siobhan O'Hanlon, Maria's cousin, and others. And they have been smeared in a despicable way. And the court acquittals of 4 of these have either been ignored or devalued by the media and by representatives in this chamber again today. The recent publication of letters from Maria Cahill to Breeds Wright demonstrates very clearly that Breeds only sought to help and support Maria. In 2005, Maria said of Breeds, "You mean the world to me. You are kind, compassionate, committed, and above all, you give me an ear when I needed it." Not my words, Maria Cahill's. The recent political attacks on Jennifer McCann, MLA, an outstanding minister who has worked tirelessly for the rights of women and children, have been a disgrace. The claim that Sinn Féin members were involved in a cover-up, because the claim is that Sinn Féin members were involved in a cover-up because they did not disclose to the police against Maria's wishes. She was an adult when she spoke to some of these folks. However, there were others in the media and in political parties, including the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, Michael Nesbitt, who has acknowledged that he knew of these allegations and that he respected Maria's wishes and did not inform the police. Are these people now to be included in the definition of cover-up, in the call for inquiries? The Taoiseach and the Fianna Fáil leader and elements of the media have sought to liken the alleged approach of Republicans to this case with that of the Catholic hierarchy. We've been accused of cover-up, as I've said, and of moving the abuser about. No evidence whatsoever has been produced to corroborate these claims, and they are untrue. I am sorry to say that the Taoiseach, the Fianna Fáil leader, and this is a matter of genuine disappointment on my part, have no interest in due process or in truth when it comes to attacking me personally or Sinn Féin generally. The Labour leader went further today and insults the entire community of West Belfast, a community I was honoured to represent for decades. Innuendo, insinuation, distortions and untruths are the preferred weapons of choice of the Fianna Fáil leader, the Labour leader and the Taoiseach. And at the whim of the Fianna Fáil leader and the Taoiseach, there's now a 5-hour debate around what are described as statements on the allegations regarding sexual abuse by members of the Provisional Republican movement. I hope this sets a precedent for regular debates on the North. I've been waiting for months for the Taoiseach to honour a promise he made here to bring forward a motion on the British Army killings of citizens in Ballymurphy. I would also point out that despite the contrived outrage and the theatrics of the Fianna Fáil leader, a number of Fianna Fáil members of his team have approached me privately to say how uncomfortable they are about their leader's behaviour on these issues. On October the 22nd, on October the 22nd, you, Taoiseach, according to the renowned human rights lawyer Peter Madden, set aside the judicial process and ignored the findings of a court of law. And Teachta Regina Doherty has repeated that 1 million-fold today. You, Taoiseach, have brought the Dáil and your office into disrepute. And your attitude is in marked contrast to your refusal to deal with legitimate questions as to how your government minister dealt with whistleblowers, the file on allegations of tax avoidance by senior Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael
Sorry, would you please stop the side comments? Thank you.
And PD politicians. In this instance, you said quite rightly you would not prejudge. Quite rightly you said that. But here, in these cases, no. You've made the judgment, you've made up your mind. And recently, we have had miles of column inches and acres of outrage about how the IRA dealt with offenders in the community in the north. As I've said before, this was well known. Tons of media commentary, of programmes, of campaigns indeed, against those actions. And Martin McGuinness and myself are quite clearly on the public record in the 1980s calling for an end to all IRA punishments. So for Fine Gael, for Fianna Fáil and for Labour politicians to feign surprise or to express bogus outrage at these actions years after they occur exposes your lack of honesty or sincerity. After decades of abandoning people in the north, today your main worry is electoralism. The real focus of all of this is on the outcome of the next general election. So as well as listening to what the government has had to say on this matter, let us look at what the government has done on these issues. In his eagerness to exploit this issue and to smear me and Sinn Féin, the Taoiseach claims that sex offenders were moved to Dublin, Donegal and Louth. Now, I have no knowledge of these claims. Has the Taoiseach given whatever information he has? He makes the charge. Has he given this information to the Garda? Has Dr. Martin? Yes. Sinn Féin is committed to dealing with all the legacy issues arising from the conflict in the north. And the government is also obliged to deal with these under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement and other agreements in an appropriate way. And any measure that would bring truth and closure to victims of abuse would be welcomed by me. We should also, as we address this difficult issue, not lose sight of the fact that there's an unprecedented level of duplicity in the attitude, particularly of Fianna Fáil and of its leadership. A succession of damning reports, including the Ryan Commission, the Ferns Inquiry, the Cloyne Report, the Murphy Report, the scandal of the Magdalen Landries, the Bethany Home, all exposed the extent to which the Catholic hierarchy and the Irish state and successive governments made up of the Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Labour Party were involved in the institutional abuse of tens of thousands of children over decades, or in the cover-up of this abuse.
Sorry, David, you want to be very careful about making accusations about making charges. Excuse me, I'm in the chair now, and I'm applying standing orders. You cannot make charges without backing them up. And you cannot make a general statement that any party, irrespective of who they are being charged with wrongdoing. So please remember that.
Thank you, Concordia.
And if you've any doubt about it, I'd refer you to Standing Order 59. It's worth reading.
Thank you, Concordia. It was also a Fianna Fáil minister who did a deal with the 18 Irish religious orders allegedly involved in child sexual abuse scandals, which severely limited their compensation liability to these victims of abuse. Sinn Féin, and in particular Teachta Angus O'Snoddy, has campaigned for many years for an all-Ireland sex offenders register. Teachta O'Snoddy has raised this issue in this chamber many times with various ministers. It is still outstanding. The Taoiseach says this government has done more for children than any other government in the history of this state. But when it comes to supporting the victims of domestic violence and of rape, this government has an appalling record. Since you assumed office in 2011, funding for rape crisis centres, women's aid refuges and other support groups have been slashed. Safe Ireland and other agencies providing support for women's groups have consistently highlighted the fact that each year hundreds of women and children cannot access refuges because of the lack of funding. And I've raised this with you many times. The Fine Gael Labour government promised in the programme for government that it would introduce consolidated domestic violence legislation to protect victims. 4 years after, almost, you were elected, that hasn't happened. Most significantly, and I've raised this with you personally, Taoiseach, many times, you have failed to sign up to the European Convention on preventing and combating violence against women and domestic violence. Recently, the figures from the Child and Family Agency revealed a major shortfall in the number of social workers with responsibility for caring for children. This represents a failure on the part of government to fulfil its commitment and responsibility. And the publication 2 years ago of the report by the Independent Child Death Review Group was a chilling indictment of child protective systems that repeatedly failed to save children from abuse and, in some cases, from death. Page after page of this report records the lives and deaths of one young person after another, and with each conclusion it's clear that the child protection system failed time after time on your watch, Taoiseach. The ICDRG report provides a disturbing and harrowing insight into the schematic failure of the Irish State's child protection systems between 2000 and 2010. It's also a damning reflection on the previous government, which failed to use the wealth of the boom years of the Celtic Tiger to invest in child protection services and strategies. The responsibility for these failures rests with your parties. You failed victims. And while we cannot change the past, we do have a responsibility to redress it, to address it, to try and make things better in the future. As I said at the beginning of my remarks, there's a need to resolve this matter through the relevant authorities north and south. And this should have been an option for all cases in the past. I did make an appeal for information 2 weeks ago, and since that appeal I have received information from a Republican source in relation to these matters. It came to me anonymously, and while I cannot vouch for it, neither do I doubt its authenticity. However, that's not a matter of judgment for me, so I have passed this information to An Garda Síochána. And I want to appeal again to anyone with any information to come forward, and also, if and when I receive any other information, I will also give this to the Gardaí. The Irish and the British governments and all political parties have a responsibility to deal with this legacy. Victims and survivors do have the right to truth and justice, and there is a need to establish, aside from this issue of abuse, a genuine truth recovery process. And other post-conflict societies have successfully used such processes to deal with these issues. And again, I've raised this many times with you here in this chamber, Taoiseach. The Haas proposals provide a viable mechanism for this to happen. And again, there's a responsibility on all of us, but especially on the Irish Government, to agree and advance those proposals. And victims and survivors do include those who were subject to sexual abuse, threat and exploitation, whether by individuals who were members of the state forces or non-state combatant groups, including the IRA or any other individuals. Survivors of sexual abuse and rape deserve acknowledgement, support and justice. Perpetrators of abuse need to be subject to the law and brought before the courts. I wish Maria Cahill well. I hope she finds happiness. I hope she has happiness and completeness in her life. I hope she gets justice and that her alleged abuser is brought to justice. I also hope that the government acts on the proposals that Sinn Féin has brought forward. The Taoiseach says that he welcomes a letter from Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness. Well, then let's act on that. These issues are bigger than party politics or the next election. I am sure that all the TDs here who are lucky enough to have families love and cherish your families. All of you. Many of you here have had family tragedies. I know that everyone here, taking you at face value, will do your best to protect your children. That's the instinct of the vast majority of human beings. Well, it's the same for Sinn Féin members, for Sinn Féin representatives and for Sinn Féin voters. And let me say, and this wasn't part of my scripted remarks, let me say on my own behalf, speaking personally, on behalf of my wider family, as well as my close family, that we deeply reject the continuous taunts and offensive commentary by some here about what was for our family a deeply traumatic episode in our family life. The rule here, I'm told, and I was told this, the rule in the South in politics and in this Dáil, is that none of this should be taken personally, that none of this is personal. That's what we're told. The person who will offend you here in the chamber will sidle up to you outside and say, "You okay?" There is nothing more personal than the remarks some of you have made here today. And finally, I suppose I shouldn't judge you on what you say in this particular debate. All of us will be judged by what we do to protect children and the rights of women.
Thank you. I now call on the technical group, Deputies Coppinger, Murphy, McGrath, Finian McGrath and Maureen O'Sullivan.